my big book study.
Hey, I'm a recovered alcoholic. My name's Tony. I'd like to welcome everybody to Thursday Night Big Book Study Workshop, program of recovery, put on by AA members to help other AA members go through this process and have their own experience. Who are you again?
My name is Joanne. I'm also a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm super stoked to be here and to make some people uncomfortable tonight.
Right on. So we're just going to finish up with the 12th step. That's why it explains they're very, it slows down on the amount of people. Everybody loves the first 3 steps. Nothing required in that, right? After that, it starts slowing down. People hear the steps we talked about. Anybody? I'd rather talk about the steps than actually having to do them, but right? Because every meeting you go to, it seems like everybody's done the steps with you. Anybody get that impression? And then as you go through the steps, you realize, holy shit, everybody hasn't gone through the steps, including you, right? And then you start going through this, have your own experience. So we're going to kind of tie this all together. Somewhere along the line, I'm not too sure where it started happening, but the fellowship started compartmentalizing the steps. I think it may have started in treatment center. I'm working this step, I'm working that step. And it started becoming the over-concentration of working a step. And really, it's a process that the steps enable us to have an experience. What's the purpose of the steps?
Get this connection to a higher power?
Yeah, to get this connection, because lack of power is our dilemma, right? So we had to find a power by which we could live. Where and how were we to find this power? That's exactly what this book is about. And how many people has gone through the process and got the connection? Pretty simple, right? And then the rest is kind of how do I maintain and develop and grow in understanding and effectiveness? How do I put this whole recipe together? Because people talk about, here are the 9-step promises or the 10-step promise. They're not the 9-step promises or the 10-step promise. It's an overview of what we could expect if we're living this way of life, right? But people compartmentalize that stuff. I'm not too sure why, but upon understanding, we're going to kind of show how we tie this together. You want to add anything on that?
Why would somebody afflicted with alcoholism need to gain access to a power greater than themselves? Anybody other than Dylan, who's been hanging out here for a while.
And he's so thrilled that he's finally getting the right answers, right? 3 years in, it's like, I got the right
more
answer.
Than 3 years.
Has it been more? Oh, yeah. Okay.
But why would somebody afflicted with alcoholism need to gain access to a higher power? Like Tony just outlined, right? You answered the
Because
question,
they can't
right?
do it on their own.
Because they can't do what on their own?
Yeah.
Exactly. So why would somebody need access to, like an alcoholic, need a power to access to power?
Lack of power.
Is what? Is our actual dilemma, right? Like, that's why we spend so much time in the big book study hanging out in step 1, right? Because really, I think a lot of people come to Alcoholics Anonymous, sit down at a meeting. Some people are talking about God. Usually if you're in your first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous or you're coming back, you're probably having the worst day of your life, right? So a lot of this sort of hopeful language centered around spiritual ideas, it feels good, right? And so it keeps you sort of coming back and listening to what other people have to say. And then you start to formulate your own ideas on what it is you think you need, right? You start to feel a little bit better. And as soon as you start feeling a little bit better, what ends up happening? More drinking, right? Somewhere along the line, we forget that we're supposed to not be drinking, right? So we lack the power to be able to do anything about that second symptom. And that's why we spend so much time in step 1, is because the rest of the steps make all kinds of varied sense if you aren't grounded in step 1, right? If you're still lingering around in the idea that somehow you're going to be able to do something about keeping yourself sober, what need is there for access to a power greater than yourself? If you are powerful enough to combat your own alcoholism, what need is there to have access to a higher power? And that's really what the steps are about, right? It's easy for us to say, what is the result of going through the steps? Access to power. But why? Like, why would an alcoholic need access to a power greater than themselves? Because they themselves are not powerful enough to stay sober for any length of time.
So do we ever get our choice back again? You hear people say, I got my choice back again. Well, do we ever get a choice back again in regards to the first? No, that means if people say they got a choice back, then they really haven't done step one, right? Because step one, we're agreeing to on beyond human aid. And it takes a lot of a real good beating in alcoholism to get to that place. Anybody? Come on. How many people here got it the first time around? It took a beating because how many people want to be their own solution? Come on, everybody put up their own hand. How many people like the idea of having to do the steps?
No, we like the idea of coming in on the worst day of our lives and engaging in some, in a space where the energy seems to feel good, in a room full of people who are not angry. We don't owe money to them, right? Like they're the last people in our lives that are actually happy to see us when we walk in the door, right? And that energy and that spiritual language and that sort of language around hope makes us feel better, right? And that's the moment when we start to formulate our own ideas about what it is we think we need. Which makes sponsorship incredibly important, right?
Because what we need to learn is a recipe that we could go back to. Because the brain is designed in such a way, it moves us away from the truth. It really does. And it focuses back on our main obsession. And what's our main obsession? Self, right? And so what we pose this thing is like, how many people's heard the promises read? How many people start experiencing the promises? So how many people got a pen and paper? Right? So they talked about their experience, having gone through this, what they experienced. That's an outlay of the promises, right? Don't say it out loud, what did they say made the promises possible? Write down the first answer that came to mind. What was their experience with the promises that made them?
What made these promises possible? Period. What's the first thing that comes to mind when I ask that question, when we ask that question? Write it down.
Write it down.
And the reason why we make you write it down is so that you can change your answer later, right? And it's not a matter of let's all look at everybody's answers so that we can laugh about their wrong. There's something educational about being wrong, right? It tells you what it is you think you know, right? And based on what it is you think you know, you can start to gain a sense of why it is that you keep going off track or you're nowhere near the track, right?
Okay, so how many people thought of something when I asked that question? What did you think of?
Submission.
Submission? That's a good one. What did you think of? Did you think of anything? Yeah? Sobriety? What did you think of? What made these things possible? What was the answer that came to your head, not in the book? No, not
Higher power.
higher power? What?
Being guided by a higher power.
Being guided by a higher power? So in the promises, they talk about we'll suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. That's the basis of the whole experience, yes? But how fast we forget that, right? And go back to self, right? They'll always materialize that we work from. Work for what? Work on this relationship. So step 12 is putting this thing all together. So when they talk about here on page 89, this is where I make a lot of friends. If you didn't have the rest of the book from 89 on, would you have everything you need to develop and maintain this relationship with a power greater than yourself to be of service in all areas of your life?
If you took this whole section of the book and threw it away, and you only had this, would you have all of the elements you needed? Would you have all the instructions you needed in order to apply these principles in your life, in order to have and maintain a spiritual experience or a spiritual relationship?
Yes. So the rest is designed in their experience on how they developed in all these different areas. Practice these principles in all our affairs. Work, home, relationships, carrying this message, the family afterwards, and they give their experience of how, remember, it took 4 years for them, 5 years to put this together. What were they operating on before they had the rest of the book? They were operating on what the message Ebby gave to Bill, yes? And that was sufficient enough for them to recover, and then they started to develop these things. What did Bill learn in the hospital? Did Bill learn everything that he needed as a recipe to develop his relationship or maintain sobriety? Did Bill have the recipe necessary before starting his step 9s, before working with others? Did he have everything he needed before leaving the hospital? How many people are here right now? How many people are not answering because no one else is answering? He had everything he needed, right? What was the purpose of the step? He went to... So when Ebby showed up, what was Ebby doing? Carrying a message. His experience with this message, yes? So working with others, what will you be doing when you start working with others? Is your experience with what? This message. Whose message? Your message or this message? This message. So what will we be talking about is how we got access, how well we know the steps, or how we got access to a power greater than ourselves that created this change. Because that's the purpose, right? When Ebby talked about this thing, he talked about a course of action that created this change, yes? Bill's seen it was possible for him to have the same experience if he went through the same course of action, yes? So that's really our job when we do 12 step. So we're doing 12-step work, but what we're doing is telling people about step 1, the symptoms of alcoholism. They diagnose themselves. And if they're interested in the solution, you explained how you went through a course of action to have this experience, yes? So in step 2, is it about your belief system, or is it about a course of action that we got access to a power that created this change? So we see there's really 2 different messages happening here, because a lot of people who haven't been through this, when it comes to step 2, what are they talking about? They're talking about their belief system and their relationship with God, which isn't step 2. How many people just went, right? Right? Because what solution are we offering? Is the same solution given to us? Yes? And was it not a course of action sufficient enough to bring about this change? Now, having had that experience, now we're going to start moving forward. Did you want to add?
Yeah, I do. Going back to page 14 in your books, right? So you may think that step 12 kind of exists on page 89, but if you actually go through the entire book, it exists all throughout the book, right? Practicing these principles in all of our affairs looks like practicing all of the steps, right? They now become principles. But on page 14, Bill specifically says, references what Tony's talking about. He says, my friend emphasized the absolute necessity of demonstrating these principles in all my affairs, right? Particularly was it imperative to work with others as he had worked with me. Faith without works was dead. What that means is sitting around praying, right, means it is nothing, right? It's without that sort of action, the practicing of these principles, of which working with others is one of the major ones, right? Faith without works was dead, he said. And how appallingly true for the alcoholic. For if an alcoholic failed to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others, that means that to perfect and enlarge your spiritual life, right? We've now entered the world of the spirit. We spent weeks going through step 11 about how to have a two-way relationship with this power deep down within, right? Specific step-by-step instructions about how to have a two-way relationship with this power deep down within. But to perfect and enlarge this relationship requires work and self-sacrifice for others, not working on yourself, right?
And we see how that's changed. I'm working on this defect, I'm working on that defect, I'm working on my old behaviors, still in first stage recovery. First stage recovery is all about who? Second stage recovery is all about what? Our relationship with a power greater than ourselves that we get access to enable us to have these things, peace of mind, serenity, purpose, direction, being able to be available to help other people. Because what's our real purpose now? Is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and the people around us. By doing that, we get more than sometimes what the people we're helping receive, right? Like, I mean, it's endless the amount of help. Joy I got working with Joanne. It was it was great. And then Dylan showed up in my life.
And here I thought it was just because he was a nice guy. Turns out that he could not survive the certain trials and low spots I had in his own life, right? Unless engaging with people with whom he had frequent contact with. And sometimes that meant through the practice of step 11, right? Through an individual's practice of step 11, through the receiving of playing the role that he assigns, right? Go talk to that person. Go give that person your phone. How many times have you had an intuitive thought like that and ignored it? And thought, I'm hungry, I need to get home. No, what I really need to do is just go home and relax and put my feet up. I'm really tired, I worked all day, right? And I don't say that to shame you because I've done it myself, right? Like people say to me all the time, like, how do you find all of the time and energy to do all of the things that you do, right? Imagine you go to your doctor's office and your doctor says, I have really terrible news for you. You're going to die. You have a disease that is 100% going to kill you. Given enough time and space, it's going to progress to a point where you're not going to be able to bounce back and you're going to die. And you're like, oh my God, that's terrible, right? This is awful. How much time do I have? We don't know, right? And then you find out that the only thing you actually have to do is enter into a relationship with something greater than yourself, follow a few simple instructions, and spend some time helping other people. And you don't have to die.
We go, how much time do I have?
Suddenly.
How much time do I have?
But suddenly, you would find all kinds of energy and time and space and ability to be able to engage with this relationship deep down within and to engage with others to help them into the fold, right?
So, in essence, what happens here, if sticking with page 14 and going into this, so Bill went through this, and you guys have gone through this process. Hypothetically, say you started from the beginning, you've gone through, did all the work. You'd have the same experience, Bill. You're starting to tap into roughly the idea of that there's something other than you. There's this intuition. You've removed a lot of the blocks. There's something happening within inside of you. Yes? Right? There's intuitiveness. And so they talk, now what are we going to do? It's the exact same thing Bill's talking about here. And a lot of people go, the steps are in order for a reason. These people don't know what they're talking about. Because the steps are not designed to be work compartmentalized, like individually. They're meant to be, one leads you into the other, and then as the result of it's like learning how to drive a car. How many people just get in their car, know where the key goes, you know what you got to do? And if you're having a problem, you check certain things and you just drive. You just put all the principles together enabling you to drive. The second half of how it works talks about practice these principles, the principles of staying connected, humility, the recipe that we learned through this. So, page 14, right at the last paragraph.
I already read that.
Oh, did you? Okay,
Yeah.
Keep going then.
He could not survive the certain trials and low spots ahead. If he did not work, he would surely drink again. And if he drank, he would surely die. Then faith
what
would
we have
be
is
dead
a daily
indeed.
reprieve, right? They expand. See how they expand on that? Yep. Go ahead.
Then faith would be dead indeed. With us, it's just like that. My wife and I abandoned ourselves with enthusiasm to the idea of helping other alcoholics to a solution of their problems. It was fortunate, for my old business associates remained skeptical for a year and a half, during which I found little work. How many people struggled or are struggling, right?
So
Hang on. Our first instinct, right, is like, I can't focus on this right now. I need to find a job. Right? I got to take care of myself financially. I got to solve this problem. I got to solve that problem. I got to solve me, right? And as we're going through this information throughout the book, constantly it's reassuring us that if we keep moving forward in these instructions, we will enter into a relationship with something that will provide everything that we need when we need it, right? But still, we think we need to focus on the things that we need to solve, right? We're still the person solving all of our problems.
Who needs to experience that now? is the person who's yet to experience it. Those of us who have experienced it talk about it, and they talked about that in We Agnostics. They cover all this again. Like they said, we rise above our problems, and people who haven't had it, they smile. They think we're a little, like the people who took me through. I thought they were crazy the way they were talking, their relationship with the power grid, and all their needs being met and things being fulfilled in ways that kind of blew my mind. So Bill's leaving the treatment center here. He has everything he needs as a recipe. We're at step 12. We have everything we need as a recipe. What do we need to do is cultivate and develop it. Why? Because we're going to start doing our nines. We're going to start going back with family. We're going to start showing up where we weren't showing up. We're going to start being a dad, a mom, a partner. We're going to start being all these things that we weren't, and we're not equipped to do that because some of these people are still pissed off at us.
All of that will feel like the wrong thing to do, right? Your thinking will be like, don't do that. Those people hate you. Don't pick up that phone. Those people aren't speaking to you, right? Don't go and be of service here, right? Like every fiber of your being will try to convince you, and you'll try to convince yourself that somehow God is trying to tell you not to go and do this thing, right? And what this process and this relationship is trying to reassure you is that if you follow these instructions, right, fitting yourself to be of maximum service to God and to those around you, you will be given all of the elements that you need in order to move forward to do these difficult, hard things, right? Make sense? And this is what he says for his first year and a half. I was not too well at the time and was plagued by waves of self-pity and resentment. This sometimes nearly drove me back to drink. But I soon found that when all other measures failed, work with another alcoholic would save the day.
So is Bill suffering from the insanity here, or his brain telling him there's a solution other than the one he's experiencing? The obsession creeping back in. So the obsession is an idea that we could smash based on our spiritual condition, based on truth, but the insanity is something that we have no defense against. So he's experiencing the human condition, because a lot of people call this alcoholism. This is not alcoholism. This is the human condition. He's facing a part of his life that he's never faced before. They talk about your problems piling up on you. You have the anxiety, fear, anybody. You're looking at the criminal charges. You're looking at financial stuff. You're looking at all the mess that you created. Ain't it grand the wind stopped blowing?
We've approached these problems as to pack our shit and move, right? We move provinces, we move countries, we move houses, we abandon one family and start another one over here, right? Like whatever. We have to do whatever it is we have to do, but avoidance is usually the way of it, right?
So we see this is the human problem. This is the human dilemma. Anybody who's neglected their life on the level that we have is dealing with human problems, yes? So now he's got to present himself, so his brain's talking to him. He's feeling anxiety, depression, because what's the sign of a person who thinks too much? Is anxiety, yes? So he's facing this lifestyle. So his brain starts saying, hey, you know what would help? Here, a drink. How many people's had that thought? And kind of go, wait a minute.
In the midst of walking into situations you've spent years avoiding, right? There's going to be discomfort. How do we combat discomfort?
How do we used to treat the human condition?
What gave us a sense of ease and comfort, right? One or two or three drinks, right? Drinks which we observed others taking with impunity. We can't take one or two or three drinks, right? Because we have the allergy, right?
So the brain, like when we do our inventory, we get to see how we operate. And how many people have crazy thoughts on a continuous basis? How many people have thoughts and go, oh my God, where did that come from? It's the brain's job is to create an entrapment to get you thinking, right? It's like identity theft, right? You get this thing on your phone that says, hey, push here and we'll deposit $200 in your account. You go, oh, it's the lure. Anybody? You see those things? And we go, no, that's a scam. Anybody? So they got to come up with better ways to get you to clickbait or to lure you into the pitfall. Your brain is the same way, right? So when you realize this is a crazy thing, and so when you're having this anxiety or these problems, what is it that we are to do? And Bill's going to talk about that now, right? When you've tried everything, self-based, what are we to do now, right? We're doing amends, we're facing family, His friends stay skeptical for a year and a half. What are we to do when we get in these jams?
Many times I have gone to my old hospital in despair. On talking to a man there, I would be amazingly lifted up and set on my feet. It is a design for living that works in rough going. We commence to make many fast friends, and a fellowship has grown up among us, of which it is a wonderful thing to feel a part. The joy of living we really have, even under pressure and difficulty, right? We're not using language here where it's like rainbows and puppies and everything is just great all of the time, and right? There's pressure, there's difficulty, there's waves of self-pity and resentment, right? But what we now have is a kit of spiritual tools, right? If applied, right? We draw nearer into this relationship. We feel a new sense, an ability to be able to to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and those around us. And we make our way through those periods, right, of waves of self-pity and resentment and out onto the other side. I have seen hundreds of families set on their feet in the path that really goes somewhere. Have seen the most impossible domestic situations righted, feuds and bitterness of all sorts wiped out. I have seen men come out of asylums and resume a vital place in their lives of their families and communities. Business and professional men have regained their standing. There is scarcely any form of trouble and misery which cannot be overcome among us.
And so when his friend said, my friend promised when these things were done, I'd have the elements of a way of living that answered all my problems. So my job in the second half of how it works talks about staying connected and to grow in understanding and effectiveness, right? So what I'm looking for is spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. How am I applying these spiritual principles to have a different outcome in my life? Instead of how am I applying self to change self. Anybody still doing that? Mm-hmm. And it's painful, right? Then we get convinced again that any life run on self-will is painful, conflict-oriented, and I'm in conflict not only with myself, but the world around me. I'm spending too much time in my thinking. So remember on page 25, we'll cover that for a second here, and we've done this. So now we're having a different view from something we read based on their experience. And the more we understand this, we'll come through the more amends we start making and the more we're living this stuff. So the more we're living it and making amends, and then, when I get jammed in, not going home and grabbing a big tub of ice cream and locking the door and shutting off the phone, is going to a meeting and finding somebody, going to the detox panel, going somewhere that's uncomfortable to go help somebody else is not a thrilling thing in the beginning. But as you experience it, it's like, hey, there's something to this. It's a phenomenon. It's an unexplainable experience that happens by doing something that makes no sense, just like the steps.
Does everybody know what counterintuitive means? It means to do something against, like, what you're feeling inside, right? Like, you feel like you should go and do this, right? But it's counterintuitive to go and do what's being suggested here. Common sense thus becomes uncommon sense. Those are Bill's words, right? It doesn't feel right in the beginning. The right thing feels like the thing that you've always done, right? Which is to retreat or to isolate or whatever your thing might be, right? The last thing we think of to do in rough going is to get up out of whatever situation we're in and go and find somebody to help. It's just not what anybody does, right? Most people, I'm not talking about alcoholics, I just mean people in general, double down on their own problem solving, right? They become over-concentrated on themselves, their own situation, and forcing it into whatever it is they think it should be, usually to their own peril and the peril of everyone around them, right? We're talking about the human condition. So what is being suggested here is that if a vital relationship with something greater than ourselves, something deep down within, right, is what provides the power enough in order to create this change sufficient enough to recover from alcoholism, then drawing closer to this power is always got to be our main focus. The best way to draw closer to this power is to go and help somebody else, right? It's not to sit at home alone praying for relief. Prayer is good, right? But prayer without action is dead, right?
And they talk about that in working with others. You may be jittery alone, saying, I can't do this. Remember, you've just tapped into an inner resource of strength. We forget that all the time. We always go back to our own reasoning and our own thinking, right? So here on page 25, they're talking about experience now, that having gone through this, we can better understand. Now I need to cultivate it. Why do I need to cultivate it? Because my mind's designed to start being refocused on self, right? And when I become refocused on self, then I become my primary purpose in solving my own problems, which we talked about here earlier, right? And we're going to give a couple of experiences here. Go ahead.
Everybody think about a problem they're having right now. Just one. I know it won't be a stretch. I can see some of your faces. I can feel the energy in this room. People got some problems going on. Think of a problem you got going on right now. There is a solution. Almost none of us liked the self-searching, the leveling of our pride, the confession of shortcomings, which the process requires for its successful consummation.
True or false? How many people liked it?
How many people enjoyed their ride through the steps? How many were like so excited to do a 4-step you can't wait to do another one? Right. Okay.
Yeah, we know when you ever notice no hands go. I was so excited. No, they said no. They've witnessed me drag my feet through this whole thing, kicking and screaming and being dragged through it.
Easy.
So.
But we saw that it really worked in others. But we had come to believe in the hopelessness and futility of life as we have been living it.
So what's our greatest example at this stage of the game? Other people. We've seen it worked in others. Because a lot of us want to use our reasoning, our thinking. I don't understand. It doesn't make no sense to me. Anybody been there? I've thought about it all week. It doesn't make sense what these people are talking about. I've looked at every angle. No. This is what we did. This is what we experienced. You want what we have. Then you need to do this to experience what we're talking about. Then we get to, wow, why didn't you tell me that? What I love is I've hooked up a lot of people with their sponsors, right? And then after a while they said, well, when I picked my sponsor, yeah, you did. So reluctant to doing this thing. And then we start taking credits for doing the steps that we forget the people, how much time people spent with us trying to get us through this thing. Right? The resistance. Anybody? Okay.
When therefore we were approached by those in whom the problem had been solved, there was nothing left for us but to pick up the simple kit of spiritual tools laid at our feet. Who laid those spiritual tools at our feet? That's what sponsorship is, right? I will challenge everybody in this room that you don't fully understand what sponsorship actually is. We think we know what it is, but we don't, right? And if we compare what it is we think we know by the information provided all throughout this book, right? Not just in one chapter. We start to get a different take on it. And it doesn't matter whether or not you're in this room and you have a relationship with something greater than yourself, you are actively living in the principles of our 11th step, you're actively working with other people, or you're going through this process, or you're new and you have, regardless of what vantage point you're looking at, right? Understanding sponsorship has its benefits from their point of view, right? We have found much of heaven, and we have been rocketed into a fourth dimension of existence of which we had not even dreamed. The great fact is just this and nothing less, that we have had deep and effective spiritual experiences which have revolutionized our whole attitude toward life.
See, it's plural experiences. In a lot of different areas, you're going to start experiencing something that's absolutely mind-boggling compared to how you thought of it on this side of it. And then you applied these stupid principles and did these stupid things. And on the other side of it, it was like, holy moly. And then you take credit for how willing you were to do this instead of the struggles and how you had to access this power to have a change. A lot of people take credit. That's why we did the promises thing there. Most people don't talk about. We suddenly realize, right, that due to my relationship, I'm able to have a different experience. Most people I'm working for it. I'm working harder. Willing to go to any lengths. Well, where's your relationship with a power greater than yourself? What?
The central fact of our lives today is the absolute certainty that our Creator has entered into our hearts and lives in a way which is indeed miraculous. He has commenced to accomplish those things for us which we could never do by ourselves. Let's just stick with the concept of a simple kit of spiritual tools for a moment. How many people in here know how to swap a transmission out of a vehicle? Did you always know? Were you born with that skill? Okay, great. So let's say we're in a room full of people who either have some knowledge, total knowledge, or no knowledge, but everybody wants to know how to do this, right? And you engage the help of somebody who's done it many times. And they bring tools along, and they lay them out. And they say, these are the tools that you're going to need in order to accomplish this, right? I'm going to stand here, and I'm going to give you some instructions based on my past experience, right, of completing this task. And you watch this person try to use these tools and follow the instructions. And sometimes you engage a little further and help them, give them some tips on how to better use the tools, right, based on your experience. Way wrenches can be combined in order to create more leverage and work smarter, not harder, all that kind of good stuff. And if everybody follows the instructions and everybody engages in what they're supposed to do and everybody uses the tools the way that they're supposed to, the task gets accomplished, right? The person teaching gains something, the person learning gains something, and the car is running and we're going, right? Does that make sense? Nowhere in there is this person jumping in and doing it for them, right? Nowhere in there is the person running away from the person who's still trying, right? If the person has walked away and given up, we're not chasing the person. Does that make sense? This is the simple idea behind sponsorship. I have an experience. I know how to use these tools. Some of my experience is limited. If we find that I don't have the experience needed, we can go find somebody who does have that experience, right? Because none of us are doing this by ourselves. But this is not a job where somebody drags you through, makes you do it, does the work for you, right? All they can do is offer their experience and help you understand how to use these spiritual tools. Make sense?
How many people have seen a fence around a property with a sign, a development sign on it? And then next thing you know, you see people laying it out. Next thing you know, there's a foundation. Next thing you know, it's starting to get stories. Next thing you know, they're renting it. How many phases do you think there are to that development before it even starts? Quite a bit. Development proposal, and that's kind of like we're at. There's a lot of different phases, a lot of things, but we have the basic recipe. More important, we have the manual that we'll rely on. And when we get stumped, we'll go back. What does it suggest? What does it do? So if we're trusting and relying on God, right? And the key element to this thing is carrying this message, right? So there's two primary focuses that I need to kind of be in mind. How can I be of service? And when the opportunity to carry AA's message. So being of service means what? Any area of my life. If I have a servant's attitude, right? How can I be of help? How can I be at work, at home, anywhere? How well do you think my life would start looking? But there's a problem with that, me and my ego. So humility would be, how many times in step 11 does it ask me to pause and redirect my thinking and remind myself I'm no longer running a show? How many times? How many people have a partner in their life? How many times if you were to pause and keep your mouth shut, your life would look a lot better? Right? Anybody? Like today, the wife phoned me and she wanted, like, the dog's not feeling well. She told me last week to mix the two dog foods together because we're switching dog foods, right? Too much so the dog's sick. He's not doing well. She says, remember I told you? I said, pause. I said, yes, I do remember. I'm sorry I didn't do that. And there was 15 sarcastic things in the back of my mind. I didn't say any of them. How well do you think my life's going to look when I go home? Pretty good. How well do you think it would look if I would have had no self-restraint? So instead of engaging with her, guess what I started doing? Praying. Because I felt the energy come up, right? I'm not I'm at work all day. You work from home. Why didn't you do it? How well do you think my life would look going home? Whether I think it's true or not is besides the point. We're going to erase that off of this.
Do you want to be right or do you want to be happy?
So here's the point I'm getting at. So as a person who has yet to develop this, all the people that went before me said, as the result of doing certain things, the second half of how it works, study it this week, right? After step 12, it talks about what we're to do. Right? We're to grow in effectiveness and understanding and look for spiritual progress. Bill talked about that, right? His friends remained skeptical. When he was in trouble, he went and worked with other people that would save the day. So this recipe, and God was in there. And so by working with other people, we get the juice. We get reconnected. I don't know how that works. We're dealing with a phenomenon. Do you experience this when you do this? It's like people say, remember sticking your tongue on a 9-volt battery? Hey, test it with a 9. Right? Once is normal. 3 times, you got a problem. No, sorry. So, early sobriety, people would tell me, go to your home group beforehand, look for somebody new. Go help them. And I said, well, I don't know what I'm doing. They say they don't know that. You used to say that to me. You know more than they do. They'll look at you like you're a genius. So, which is good for you.
Oh, well, that's all you wanted, yeah.
But when you're helping a new person, you're so excited that you're taking the time. You see them, you're helping them. But the other thing is in the amends. So I was unemployable when I finally got sober. And if I'm trusting and relying on God, my prayer, a lot of my prayers was, God, I don't know what's happening here. You said you'd look after me. Help me be present and give me everything I need. You promised that on page 63. I used to call God out on that. So this is how it starts working. If I'm working on being of service, being of help, I needed some rent money on one job. Rent was, I went to welfare. They wanted me to go for a psych assessment. They weren't going to give me a welfare. He said, how did the appointment go? They were, I freaked out at the people at the office. There was glass there.
Because they wouldn't give you what you wanted.
Yeah, so I went home, and he says, well, rent's due next Friday. I said, it's okay, God's got it. And he went, oh, my God. Remember, there's bikes piled all over the place, not 10 speeds. You know what I mean? And they got things going on. There's scales. There's iron on the table. I'm sobering up in a real fancy place, right? So I said, God's got this. So that night I prayed about it. Someone said, grab a paper. I grabbed the paper, which I've never done. I looked at this job. Something said, phone this job. I phoned this job. The guy goes, can you start tomorrow morning? Yeah. I started the next day. I worked Friday, Saturday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I got paid Friday. I went back into work Saturday. I gave him the rent. I got paid that Friday. Unheard of. Right? I got paid that Friday for the whole week. I went to work Saturday. The foreman told me to do something. I told him, make me. I got fired. But I got everything I needed. I got the rent. It may sound kind of weird, but so then.
But think for a moment about how much energy is being exerted there trying to force what you want, right? What Tony wants, right? Instead of just relaxing and taking it easy and trusting that whatever he needed would be provided, right? And that although it doesn't look perfect, right? He got fired on Saturday. His needs were met, right?
And that was an experience of wow. Like it's unheard of. Everybody said you got job the next day and you had rent the following Friday. Unheard. Another thing, my brother was going through this time trying to find work again. So my brother goes, hey, do you mind going by my place and picking up the VCRs or whatever they were, bring them back to, yeah, I know, aging myself, bring them back to, right?
It's just
bring them back
so much
to
of our stories are
Blockbusters,
similar.
right? Bring them back to Blockbusters. I could, not that far back. So I tried.
Oh, but it does go that far back somewhere.
Here's the idea. My brother asked me to do that. Because he'd done so much for us, I said, it seemed like, I said, yeah, I can do that for you. I went into his house to go grab and as I was picking him up off the table, the phone rang. I answered the phone, and they said, hey, is your brother there? I won't say his name, but is your brother there? I said, no, he's away. He says, oh, I need him to work tomorrow. He says, what do you do? I said, I'm a carpenter. He says, can you work tomorrow? At that moment, the phone rang, and I started that job. It's kind of weird. It's kind of like, and so it's kind of like, hey, there's something happening here. when I was making amends, something said go over here. I went over there, and so I started seeing things that were really, really unexplainable. But I started going, hey, there's something to this. So when I was sitting in jail waiting to get my when I was making that amends and waiting to get bail on all my charges, I was doing 12-step work. People were asking me, what are you doing here? I said, God, give me the strength to be present. Instead of praying for things, I was praying about things. There's a big difference. Most people pray for things. Step 11 is praying about things. How could I be of service here? How could I be of help? Going to a meeting, find somebody less fortunate off that's hoping to have what you're complaining about. Anybody? And where do you get these experiences? Is in your 9. So now you're having a real hard time with some of your 9s. What do you think would be the thing to do? Talk about it at all the meetings you go to. Read page 417 until you have a change.
Stress about it. Ruminate about it. Call your sponsor 4 times a day about it.
What's the recipe? What do I do? What?
Do your amends.
Do your amends. Okay, so I'm having a hard time with the amends. It's not going well. It's challenging. I have court coming up. I'm looking at penitentiary time. I got these things. I'm sober, right? I got anxiety, fear.
Sometimes the circumstances aren't even that extreme, right? Sometimes the circumstances, there really isn't any impediment to it except what's going on inside of our minds, right? We make it so big. We make it so insurmountable. We think endlessly about it, right? We exert so much energy being up in our head about it rather than the minimal amount of energy it would take to just get up and go and do it, right? What can we do in those moments?
Well, what have we done? Drink?
What are some other things we've done instead?
How many people suffer from depression, anxiety, don't leave the house?
Engaging in distracted
Isolation.
behavior. Spending money we don't have on shit we don't need, right? Eating stuff we shouldn't, not taking care of ourselves, isolating and being antisocial.
Conflict-oriented. Anybody? Are we hitting some highlights here? And the more you double down, anybody getting worse? So that's how we used to handle things. So you start showing up again and you can't shake it. What's the recipe?
Remember that we agreed we were going to be willing to go to any lengths in order to overcome alcohol, right? Those are a quote right out of the book, right in the step 9 instructions, right? We agreed that we would go to any lengths.
What did Bill do when he was going through a hard time? And he tried everything, prayer, talking about it, making a man, but he was still shaking it a little rough. What did he do?
Talk to another alcoholic.
Well, a little different than talking. He went and worked. He went and found somebody.
We started the meeting off with what he did, right? That's how we started the meeting tonight. We went back to page 14, right? Page 15. What worked in rough going? What always saved the day?
When all else failed, everything that I've done, what? Go work with another alcoholic. It makes no sense, but it creates a shift sufficient enough for us to be, right? It makes no sense, but why do you think 35 years later I'm still doing this? Because the benefits not only do I get, but I get to watch other people benefit from doing this, right?
Sometimes you don't even have to go anywhere, right? Like I shared a couple of weeks ago, had a really difficult amends to make. It was complicated. There was a lot of hurt feelings. There was more than one person involved. If I got in touch with her, it would injure him. If I got in touch with him, it would injure her. One of those situations, right? And it was a big one. And it was really eating my lunch, right? And even the discomfort of having it still out there, the wreckage still out there, unresolved, was still not motivating enough for me to go and do the thing that I had specific instructions about what to do. It wasn't even a matter of I didn't know what to do. I knew exactly what it was I had to do, right? But I did everything in my power to resist having to go and do the uncomfortable thing. And eventually, God intervened, and I'll share that story at another time, and they were put in my path. And I made arrangements to go and see her. And as I'm driving to her house, I am wildly uncomfortable. This is the last thing I want to do. And I'm almost convincing myself in that step 11 kind of we'll convince ourselves in all kinds of absurd ways, right? That we're still spiritually connected in these, like maybe God's trying to tell me that this is not the time, right? Like this is some sort of like divine intervention telling me that I shouldn't be going and doing this. And I start to think about all of the times that Tony has shared the stories that he's just shared with you now, right? And I was not a believer, right? I had spent so long trying to apply these things and relapsing and never experiencing any of the things that people talked about that I didn't really think they were possible for me. So in a completely sarcastic moment, I rolled my eyes. I physically rolled my eyes and thought, all right, fine. I'll pray, right? And I didn't pray for relief or the ability to make it to the amends or for me to feel better. I'm like, fine then, send me somebody to help. That was the thought. And my phone rang. And Carly phoned me. And she was having a shittier day than I was. And so we just ended up chatting on the phone. You kind of get taken out of yourself. You're not thinking about your situation anymore, the difficult thing that you have to do, right? Because you've been placed in a position to be of service to somebody else in that moment. And we completed our phone call as soon as I got into the driveway. I felt lighter. I felt the ability to be able to get out of the car. It's an incredible thing when something shows up for you, right? When you feel like nothing has shown up for you your whole life. And something shows up for you and responds in a moment where you ask, right? Selflessly for the ability to be of service in that moment. And I was able to go and complete the task ahead. And it turned into, it was a 9, and then it was a 12-step, and it was her first step, and she was struggling, and it was this really amazing experience that had nothing to do with me or me being forgiven or the thing that happened years ago. It was about the strengthening of this experience and the sharing of it, not just with Carly, but with the person that I ended up having the step 9 with, right? I wouldn't have designed that for myself. I would have gone home and put it off for another day because that's how I dealt with everything. That's how this works, right? And I can't explain it other than out of my own experience. It makes no sense that in that moment, when I would ask for somebody to be of service to you, that my phone would ring like that. And there's an element to this thing that doesn't make any sense. We just know that it works.
So if you start doing this stuff, and so what, my sponsor, you're looking for God's fingerprints on things, and you start doing things that makes no sense, but you're getting some remarkable results that make no sense whatsoever. So when they talk about becoming a working part of the mind, the pausing and the, okay, what do you want me to do? Go over here. It's not why. Or if you pray about something, you hear something, say, no, you didn't hear me. Let me pray again. Anybody pray, hear an answer? And said, no, you didn't hear me. Right? Or someone will say, go to this meeting or go to this place, and you want to know why. And it's if something's orchestrating your steps, like that building is being built, the foreman will say, hey, go over here, put this over here. And if we follow as we go along, the development starts happening. So I have a pretty good intuitiveness now that I rely on it quite a bit. Sometimes I miss the mark, but a lot of times it's like my life, when it says I've never wanted for anything since I've sobered up. Now, I've had to go through a lot of self-reliant situations. I was 7 years sober when I lost everything in sobriety. Everything. My marriage, everything fell apart. And then what it was showing me is my reliance on people, places, and things. We think we're relying on God, but we're really relying on is people, places, and things. And you don't know that till those things start getting threatened. So I lost everything, and I went, well, at least I still have my truck. Not a relationship. At least I still have my truck. Then somebody smashed into my truck.
Oh.
Like now my lips getting lower, right? I'm losing everything. I'm in this apartment where I have plants, right? And I buy this window van, and like, it's pathetic. My life's pathetic. And I go, at least I still got my stereo in my truck, and somebody stole the stereo, right? And then I was coming back from a meeting, and I heard these guys putting a case of beer in the car, and I heard the bottles clinging together.
Clink, 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 clink.
And it's sung, like it makes a certain noise. Yeah, so normally they'll go, what are you talking? We're all like, yeah, I know that noise. Let the symphony begin, right? And then in my mind, I heard the case of beer opening. You know how it sounds?
Yeah.
Then I heard, I'm walking back from a meeting, and this is all happening. I'm in this trance. And I hear the beer coming out of the sleeve of the case. I'm 7 years sober. And then I heard the tss. And I seen me going in my mind, and I'm, oh my God, I had a moment of panic, and I remember going back to my apartment. I dropped on my knees, and I realized I had God, I had everything I needed, and from that moment on, my life has never been the same, and it's been moment after moment after moment, things that make no sense at all, like this was my daughter. I'm in North Vancouver. I'm at the noon meeting. She's over in daycare. Something said, go right now to the single parents meeting. I've never been to that. Something said, go. So I said, okay. I left the meeting and went over to the single parents meeting. Something said, go to the window. I went to the window and I looked down, and it was where her daycare was. And there was two kids stepping on her, pushing her between the bench and the thing with no staff there. And I went right down, and I was able to pull her from that situation. Kind of weird, right? And then there was another situation where a guy was sitting on a thing of plywood at one of the jobs, the studios I work at. I never take day calls. Something said, hey, you want to take this day call? I said, okay. Something said, take the day call. So I took the day call. I went in there, and there was a guy sitting in the dark. He says he was praying. He was contemplating. I won't get into the whole story. He says his life's gone to hell in the handbasket. He was just talking to God. He needed some help. And I walked in, and this is what he says, oh, my God, are you kidding? He knew it was like, you of all people. I said, yeah. And we talked, right? And he's still sober. Another guy, this is another person's story. He was standing on his balcony, smoking a cigarette with all empties, talking, contemplating his life. Anybody ever been there? This guy, he phones his sponsor and says, oh, I got a great day today. I got a gig right down the street from me. It's 20 minutes from my place. As he was going to his job, the phone rang and says, no, you got to go to this other job. It was an hour away. He started bitching and complaining all the way there. He was a window cleaner. He got up and he started coming down the balcony. He parachuted right into the guy's balcony. He hit the guy. The guy fell into the empties, and he did a 12-step call. So sometimes, like, why am I being here? You don't have to know why. I'm just going there. Anybody, you have any experiences like that?
Yeah, dozens. I think that probably one of the most powerful principles we practice, and hopefully the hour has been focused on that, is the ability to fit ourselves to be of maximum service. We don't give ourselves that ability, right? It's the practicing of these principles that fit us to be of maximum service to God and those around us. And if we're finding ourselves playing the role that He assigns, we find ourselves in all kinds of remarkable situations. And there are situations, I would not have normally put myself in. And in the worst moments, and there have been some like really soul-crushing moments, right? I mean, life is very, very difficult at times. For the most part, it's really quite enjoyable. But there will be hardships in sobriety. And do we have the tools that we need in order to endeavor through those hardships? Or are we going to run away and avoid them, right? Last November, I lost my father suddenly, and I found myself in Victoria by myself. While he was in the ICU on a respirator. So I couldn't engage with him. And I was there as the only link for my family, right? Giving updates on a daily basis about what his condition was as he slowly deteriorated. It was very isolating, it was very scary, and it was very awful. And I thought to myself, I don't think I've had to face anything quite this difficult in sobriety, and I feel very alone. And suddenly it was like, go down the street to that church and see if there is a meeting there today. And so I went down the street to the church, and there was a meeting starting in 20 minutes. And really, I could feel like when I walked into the meeting, like I wanted somebody to be there for me, but there was a newcomer there. And I stayed and chatted with her for, maybe 30 minutes after the meeting. I don't know where she is now. I'm not her sponsor. It's not some sort of miraculous story of how I entered into her life. And, we just had a 30-minute conversation after that meeting. And I felt like I had everything I needed after that 30 minutes to go back to that hospital and do what needed to be done, which is the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my life. So it is a design for living that works in rough going. And your idea of sponsorship, that somehow engaging and working with others means that you're entering into some sort of lifelong relationship where you have to be responsible for this whole other person, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about being in the role that this higher power assigns at any given moment. That role might only be 15 minutes, but if you are spiritually present, you can show up for it, right? And you can experience what we've experienced. On page 100, it says, both you and the new man must walk day by day in the path of spiritual progress. If you persist, remarkable things will happen. When we look back, we realize that the things which came to us when we put ourselves in God's hands were better than anything we could have planned. Follow the dictates of a higher power, and you will presently live in a new and wonderful world, no matter what your present circumstances. And that is absolutely 100% true.
So we're moving into the second fellowship, the fellowship of the Spirit. Whose job is it now to grow in understanding and effectiveness? Your job. Whose job is it to go through the rest of the book to hit some highlights on principles on how to apply these things in all areas of my life through their experience? Your job. Whose job is it to carry this message to the next person who still suffers? Your job. Who's the representatives of Alcoholics Anonymous now in Alcoholics Anonymous? You guys are. Not everybody's responsible, but now you guys are responsible because now you know. Right? You have the life-saving message of being able to help somebody else out or go sit on your couch. You choose. Go grab some life preservers, get back in the boat and go help people who are drowning, or go sit at home.
And try to solve your own problems.
May the force be with you. Live long and prosperous. And we're going to start from the beginning again next week. We'll have the 7th edition. We're self-supporting through our own contributions. Thanks, guys.